I am one of many who deeply enjoyed their brief time in New World during its closed beta. Originally, I had very little hope for this game and only tried it out on a whim after my friend had suggested we do so. I'm very happy my friend suggested it because I have been waiting for a new, solid MMO to make my main game for a very long time now. The game was not perfect, but certainly had more pros to it than cons in both my eyes and majority of the player bases, as the game saw steady Steam numbers and Twitch viewership from release all the way to the final hours of the beta. But the game also had many flaws, some of which can be very easily fixed, while others will take a bit more research and testing. Though I have my own personal gripes with the game, this video will not be a subjective one. This video will be presented as the video I will provide to Amazon Game Studios, where I tasked with collecting the feedbacks of the community and providing it in an objective presentation at a board meeting or something like that. This video will include every single major criticism that the majority of the community of New World has brought forth so far, and will also provide suggestions on how to remedy or alleviate those criticisms in the easiest, most efficient way possible. This video is made with the goal of being the voice of the people who want this game to succeed. This is the consensus of New World. This video essay will be a rather lengthy one as it tackles many topics, so I thought it best to break them into categories. We'll start off with the core gameplay, which will cover the issues that most people have with the game on a basic level. Then we will discuss PvE, followed by PvP concerns, and lastly, we'll end it off with miscellaneous things like cash shop influence and cosmetics. The general consensus for the gameplay is that it is pretty solid, it just needs some fine tuning. The largest complaint about the gameplay, however, is the stagger mechanic and its removal. You may be thinking that stagger is more of a PvP concern and should be saved for that section, but on the contrary, stagger affects the entirety of New World, both in PvP and PvE. For those who don't know, stagger is a mechanic present in many action games, though it is one you probably never realized existed. It's when you hit an enemy with an attack and they flinch, basically. It was present before in New World, but was removed directly prior to New World's closed beta. The closed beta of New World had by far many more players than any other version thus far. This means that a majority of the player base of New World only knows New World in its current state. They don't even know that there was ever a different version. Oddly enough though, when players find out about the different version, even though they themselves have never played it, many of them still immediately prefer it over the current staggerless version of the game. I won't harp on this for too long, as there are dozens of essays and videos that go over stagger and why it is important for New World's gameplay in great detail, including this video here.
Despite there being very little choice in the attacks that you use, the game offers significant depth of play because it makes the decision of when and where to attack more important. It's a game about timing and spacing, where every action is a commitment and you need to think and consider the situation on screen before you commit to any action at all. Take a look at the following clips of me using the same button against the same enemy, doing the same attack. In a traditional MMO, I'd be making the same decision. I decided to press R2. But the outcome of some of these clips are entirely different to the others. Sometimes I deal no damage and take significant damage myself. Sometimes the complete opposite happens. The outcomes of these interactions are not random, they're based on small differences in timing and spacing. Those small differences are the decisions that you make as a player which completely alter the outcome of the fight. This is where the decision-making process lies in Souls.
And he's absolutely right. This decision-making concept is what made Dark Souls the phenomenon that it is, and would undoubtedly add an entire layer of complexity on top of New World. The only counter-argument to adding stagger back is apparently the same reason it was removed. This issue is called stagger locking. This is when a player gets stuck in a stagger state because he or she is being attacked by multiple players at once. There have been attempts to remedy this issue, but apparently the remedies that Amazon Game Studios implemented were not enough for either their own goals or the satisfaction of the players. Either way, stagger and its return is easily the highest requested change on both Reddit and the official forums, and seeing Stagger return in some fashion, large or small, would almost be guaranteed to be a net positive. Some suggestions: add Stagger back only to the first hit on an auto attack chain, or the second or the third, or add Stagger to only heavy attacks. If you absolutely do not want to see Stagger return in any way, shape, or form, then there needs to be a serious revamp of crowd control in the game, either by making crowd control more effective or shortening some of the game's longer crowd control skill cooldowns. While this would not entirely fix the issue of having no Stagger at all, it would greatly help with diminishing its absence's effects, and hopefully provide the player with more decision-making options. This would also address another large complaint of the community in respects to the gameplay, and that is the low amount of skills. Bringing back Stagger would lower the emphasis on needing more skills, while lowering the skill cooldowns could do the same. Another common complaint about the gameplay is that weapon swapping can be clunky at times. Perhaps that can be looked into, maybe adding some sort of cue when pressing the swap button could help. The next major complaint about the core gameplay is the movement speed of your character in the game. Naturally, MMO players will go straight to no mounts being the problem, but many in the New World community believe that mounts would actually take more away from the game than add to it. If you are to attempt to address this concern of low mobility, there are other ways to do it. Some of the major suggestions being a movement speed increase while on roads or paths, or adding some sort of a sprint feature. Sprint was present in a previous version of New World, so it shouldn't be too difficult to add it back. These suggestions could help alleviate the movement speed issue without changing too much in the game. At the very least, increasing the base movement speed of the character by a small amount could also help. Let's talk about stat allocation next. At this time, Constitution is the most common stat because it gives much more per point to the player than any other stat. The common consensus is that Constitution either needs to give less per point or the other stats need to give more per point. Of course, this was a short beta, so this consensus may not be entirely accurate, especially when considering that late game will probably remedy this issue on its own, but it's definitely worth acknowledging. Stamina is also a concern. The game actually rewards you for spamming dodge and depleting your stamina as quickly as possible because stamina recovers faster while fully depleted than when it is not. A simple change like making stamina recover slower when fully depleted than when it is not would immediately add more value to proper stamina management. Not being able to recover stamina while attacking, which was also a feature present in the game in the past, is also a common suggestion. Next, let's talk about armor loads. Many feel that full heavy armor is pointless to put on because you can achieve many of the pros of wearing all heavy without getting any of the cons just by wearing a couple pieces of medium armor. This consensus is that heavy armor should be something that forces more of a commitment so that people are not allowed to achieve the benefits of wearing heavy armor with no consequences in exchange. The same can be said for light armor as well. So now let's look at some PvE concerns. A major complaint from the community and what seems to be unanimous is that the questing system is absolutely atrocious. This slightly ties in with the character movement speed complaint because many of the quests require you to travel incredibly long distances to complete them. It would be a lot to ask for a complete rework of the questing system, but a common recommendation is to make killing mobs give more EXP as well as PvP quests. The town board was a huge alleviation to this issue, but it was nerfed to near uselessness towards the end of closed beta, and many would argue rightfully so. However, there is a reason so many use the board to level instead of quests. It's just less of a hassle, and instead of forcing players to do these quests that they simply do not wish to do, providing them with healthy but fair alternative sources of experience shouldn't be too much of an issue. The other complaints: dungeon difficulty. Many people find dungeons incredibly easy, even late game dungeons, sometimes due to the dungeon mechanics, other times due to low damage the mobs deliver to the player. Increasing dungeon mob damage, or adding hard mode versions of these dungeons that give greater rewards or perhaps increase the chance at the same rewards could help alleviate this issue. Another common complaint is that there is not many dungeons to do at in-game, but I'm sure there will be more and more dungeons added in the future, so that complaint is not exactly fair when directed at a vanilla MMO. The same applies to the complaint of mob variety, which isn't really too much of an issue, especially if you reintroduce stagger and make these mobs much more threatening than they already are. That might help with the dungeon difficulty issue as well, just a thought. Next, let's talk about PvP. The largest concern in the community for PvP at this time, aside from stagger making a comeback, is probably the same for many other PvP MMOs, and that is balancing. Balancing in any MMO is an incredibly difficult task. You have to take in so many factors when you make changes, and you'll likely never make everyone happy. At the end of the day, there will always be a sort of tier list for classes and, in this game's case, weapons. But there is a difference between something being slightly imbalanced and something being so good that a player is at a detriment for not using it. The life staff is overpowered for several reasons according to the consensus, but the bottom line is that you are able to heal, tank, and deal damage if you use a life staff coupled with a good focus gem on a strong weapon like a great axe and heavy armor. This makes you an immobile killing machine that can almost never die.
And you can also have Great Axe out for fucking damage reduction because that's broken. So it's even better. So it's impossible to beat in 1v1, guys. It's really, literally is.
This is perfect, Zach. There you go.
He can also dodge roll for 20% more healing.
Yep.
And also dodge my hits. Like, it's literally impossible to kill.
Not broken.
And many players throughout the beta discovered and abused this gameplay option. Though many players never had the opportunity to run into it, it would undoubtedly become the meta of New World if not addressed immediately. Of course, you would want to solve this issue while keeping the life staff in a good spot. Removing focus gems will be the easiest option, as this will force life staff users to spec into stats other than focus if they want to deal damage with any other weapon, thus lowering their healing output if they choose to do so. Another option is forcing persistent healing abilities and buffs to remove when swapping weapons. Both of these suggestions from the community would allow the life staff to remain as a powerful healing weapon, but only if either spec'd properly or used properly. The Great Axe is the next weapon that many believe needs to be toned down, but the consensus is a bit more mixed for this one than the life staff. Some believe that the Great Axe's damage is fine, but it's just the tracking that it has which is the issue. For those who don't know, tracking is when your character automatically moves within melee damage range to a target when you are close enough to them but not close enough to land a hit. The Great Axe by far has the best tracking of all melee weapons, and either lowering its tracking or increasing the tracking on all other melee weapons is a common suggestion. Other than that, there is a suggestion that the Great Axe's second heavy swing should not do double damage. Some think that it is a bug, some think that it is intended, but many think it should not exist, though it is easily avoidable in most situations. Gravity Well also being the only ability in the game that removes the ability to dodge roll for an extended period of time could also use a look over. The hatchet is another common complaint, but really this one is a lot more unanimous and simple. The heal on the skill Berserk is just too much, especially when people are running a lot of Constitution, which we discussed earlier. This is because Berserk provides the player with a percentage-based heal. So the more HP they have, the stronger the ability is, and thus the stronger the hatchet is. Removing this heal or lowering it a bit would easily solve many players' issues with the hatchet. Other weapons like the Ice Gauntlet and Fire Staff were starting to pick up steam and get noticed by the community towards the end of beta, but there was not enough time for the majority of the community to form a consensus on them.
More damage than me, I think.
Wait, that's 3.3 mil?
Oh my god, you did 338,000 damage, buddy.
3.3 mil?
Oh, I did... Wait. I did 495,000 damage.
I did 3.3 mils, dude.
Oh, 3.3 million damage. Whoa.
The next major concern from the PvP community is PvP incentives. At this time, there is very little incentive to flag up for PvP outside of PvP quests, weapon EXP, and your own personal enjoyment. While there is certainly much to gain from flagging up for PvP early on in the game, later on it will become less and less of a gain and more of a hindrance as the player caps out on weapon EXP as well as their respective faction points. This worries PvPers as they don't think it's fair that people who do not flag are essentially getting nearly the same perks that they are with none of the cons, which in turn creates an environment where PvPers feel no need to flag themselves. Now, of course, no one wants the game to become forced PvP. That's not a solution that the general consensus would agree with, but instead, adding a PvP server per region that forces every player in the server to have their flag on after reaching a certain level is a prominent suggestion. This will solve the issue entirely and make both sides happy, and if it didn't work out, you could always merge the PvP server back to a PvE server. But if you do not want to do this, you could also create a late game region where you are forced into PvP when you enter, akin to RuneScape. This will consolidate the PvPers and also provide both PvPers and non-PvPers with an incentive to flag. At the very least, increasing the bonuses received for being flagged could also suffice and be adjusted accordingly in the future. PvP scaling is another complaint. PvP scaling, for those who don't know, is the increase in damage given and the decrease in damage taken by a player who is lower level than the player they are fighting, and the amounts of the increases and decreases are scaled based on the sizes of the level disparity between the two players. Though many in the community believe that PvP scaling can be a bit overtuned at times, the vast majority believe that PvP scaling is a refreshing and much welcome addition to the game. They believe that skill should almost always be more important in combat than gear and levels. The 50v50 faction PvP wars could also use some work. The community worries that the game will become a one-faction Zerg fest where everyone just joins the dominant faction and calls it a day. You may think that because you have implemented a feature that makes it where you can't change factions to the dominant faction solves this, but it really doesn't, as people can easily just make new characters to circumvent this issue. And you wouldn't want to make it where new players can't join the dominant faction, because then new players will not be able to play with their friends if their friends happen to be in that dominant faction. The easiest fix would be to give higher incentives for companies in the most dominant faction to switch factions while keeping their company intact. This would easily solve the issue of one faction takeovers. Also, many people are not able to compete in 50v50s simply by signing up because the company in charge of the war will always choose the strongest players that have signed up or their friends. Several suggestions to help this issue would be to have the roster be made of some amount of choosable players and then some amount of random players. This would make it so that team stacking would be a lot more difficult, and you could lower or increase the random amount of members based on the company's faction dominance. For example, the more territories your faction owns, the more random slots you must fill for war. Something like that could go a long way. But if you don't want to go that far, just somehow making the faction that is defending at a slightly larger disadvantage than the faction that is attacking would also suffice. This disadvantage can increase gradually over consecutive wins as well. Finally, let's talk about miscellaneous complaints. I'll just go through these quickly as they are not as complex as the other complaints mentioned in this video. By far the largest miscellaneous complaint is this rainbow lion. Many people feel that it is far too unrealistic and intrusive to the game, especially since the player has no way to avoid it. The community also fears that more rainbow lion type cosmetics will release in the future and is pretty adamant about that not being a good thing for the game. The next complaint is more of a fear of what could happen, and that is pay to win or pay for convenience. Though it is not unanimous, the majority of the community would much prefer these features not be added and the cash shop remain strictly cosmetic. A minimap is also a common request. While a minimap is not required, the consensus questions why it is not featured, as it is essentially a quality of life. Adding an option for a minimap would please many. Female models are very masculine to many. Many in the community would like more feminine female attire that is different from the male attire. This could also be alleviated via the cash shop. The community also has an issue with kill stealing, more specifically gather stealing. When a player kills a mob, another player comes up to skin it. Simply making it where skinning rights are tied to the player who attacks the mob first would solve this issue entirely. The rest of the complaints are mostly centered around bugs and exploits, which I'm sure Amazon is aware of. I highly doubt that AGS wants players moving at light speed in an area that has not been released yet. Addressing these bugs swiftly and promptly, like you did with the movement speed bug from the Ice Gauntlet during the closed beta, would be greatly appreciated. In closing, I just want to say thank you to Amazon Game Studios. You have done a good job with this game, and a majority of the community can tell that you want to make a quality product. This is why they are providing you with so much criticism, and also why I made this video. New World is technically already a success, but we want it to be more than that. We want this to be the MMO of the 2020s, and we believe that you can do it. We hope that you take our criticisms into consideration and act on them as you see fit. At the end of the day, it's your game, and you know what's best for what you want it to be. We can only hope that what you want aligns with what the community wants. Thank you for watching.